Welcome to another episode of Metal and Beer. Alright, so today I am going to be tasting the 60-minute IPA from Dogfish Head. So I have had this before. Actually, I had like one or two of these yesterday, and I've tried it actually maybe 2 or 3 times prior to that. I haven't had this a lot, and I think that has a lot to do with just I tend to stick with the local breweries here. This is from Delaware, and you guys know I live in the Tampa area. This is brewed out of Delaware. That always reminds me of Wayne's World when they're like, you want a vacation to Delaware. I'm sure Delaware's not that boring. I've actually been there a time or two. But anyway, so we're going to try this beer out together today. And I'm just going to share my thoughts on it, you know, as far as the taste goes and all that good stuff. So yeah, 60-minute IPA from Dogfish Head. Now, there's a few interesting things about this particular beer. For one, you may be asking, well, why is it called 60-minute IPA? That's because they actually boil the hops for 60 minutes. Now, the other interesting thing about this beer is they continuously add hops to that boil during the process. So that just gives it a different flavor. Now, I will say, before I taste this, I believe the goal of this particular beer for Dogfish Head was to create kind of like a session IPA. This is 6%, by the way. The ABV is 6% and the IBU is 60. So I don't expect it to be like overly bitter. And again, that was the goal for this particular beer here, was to create more of just a kind of a smooth IPA without the overly bittering flavors that you get from a lot of the IPAs, which I like both, to be honest with you. So, you know, there's a time and place for everything. So right away, I'm going to tell you right away, when I smell this, I get some piney aromas. And to be honest with you guys, it really doesn't, I don't get the IPA aroma. I get more of like a very interesting lager style aroma from that. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's just what I'm getting right now. So let's taste. Cheers, by the way. Okay, so as it hits your palate, and this is just based on my experience right here with you guys, that's when you start to absorb some of that citrusy flavor that, you know, you're used to getting with IPAs. But it's definitely not overly citrusy. You know, a lot of times in IPAs, you're getting a mixture of just like things that are just kind of like blowing up in your mouth type thing with grapefruit and citrus and all these different flavors that are added to a lot of the IPAs. Now, the types of hops they're using for the 60-minute IPA are, I believe, Northwestern hops. And again, they use, I think, up to or maybe even over 60 hops during that 60-minute, continuously adding those during that 60-minute process. So that's pretty interesting, and hey, that's some work right there, man. I mean, you've got to monitor that. On that note, I believe there's been several versions of this IPA. I think it was released in early 2000. Let me check that real quick. Yeah, 2003 to be exact. That's when the first version of the 60-minute IPA was released by Dogfish Head. Now, I can't really compare this version to any prior one, because back then, 2003, I don't really think I was into craft beer back in those days. What a shame. Now, what I will say, if you're picking up 60-minute IPA, and of course, if you didn't watch this video and you're looking for a hoppy IPA, you're expecting that bite, you're probably going to be a little disappointed, because again, this is not what this beer was brewed for. This beer, again, is mainly to give you that really relaxed and kind of smooth and balanced flavored IPA. But it is a smooth session IPA. It is one of those you can probably have a few of these while you're working maybe and be okay, you know what I mean? I'm not saying you should drink beer when you're working, you know, but if you have an office job, hey, it's okay. So yeah, 60-minute IPA from Dogfish Head. Very good session IPA if you're looking for something that's not overly hoppy and just very smooth and balanced. Now let's talk about the metal part of this Metal and Beer episode. So I want to talk about an album, a very specific album that when this album was released, and I believe it was released in 1990, I truly believe it changed the direction of heavy metal music. Not really extreme metal, but just heavy, just the classic metal and heavy metal music subgenre. And that is Judas Priest's Painkiller. Now, let me take you back probably to about 91, 92. When I first heard the album, I was watching, when MTV was cool, I was watching Headbanger's Ball. A lot of you remember that, and that was just such an awesome thing. Like, I wish that was still in existence today. But I remember watching Headbanger's Ball and seeing this video come on, hearing this double bass drum intro, and I'm like, okay. And then I hear the guitars come in, I'm like, okay. And then all of a sudden it just kicks in. And then of course Rob Halford starts his vocals, and I'm like, holy crap, what just happened? And I was just so excited. I'm like, wow, this is just like the best thing I've ever heard in my life. Now, when I first heard this song, again, when I first heard it, it was probably back in 91, maybe even 90, I don't remember, but I had just recently gotten into heavy metal and playing guitar and all that, and I was introduced to metal music with Metallica's Master of Puppets and Justice for All albums, so I would always compare anything I heard after that in the metal genre to those albums, and most everything seemed like kind of underneath that. But when I heard Painkiller, I was like, oh man, it immediately just became one of my favorite songs, because that's the opening track. And of course, I listened to the rest of the album. I'm like, wow, this is not what I expected from Judas Priest. Judas Priest has been around for a long time, if I'm not mistaken, since the very early 70s, and maybe they even started before that. But I think their first album came out like in the very early 70s. Metal back then, what was called metal, heavy metal or whatever back then, in the modern era, especially at that time, that would have been considered more of like rock or hard rock. You know what I mean? There was just some elements in the late 80s, early 90s metal music, just some heavy elements there that you didn't really have, that you couldn't quite capture in the eras before that. So hearing Painkiller and then comparing that to the prior Judas Priest albums and music that I had heard, it was like, okay, there's a vast difference here. There's something going on here. And then once I dug in a little further, I'm like, okay, the main factor that changed the direction of that band, at least for that album, was the drummer. They had a new drummer who was Scott Travis, and he was with a band called Racer X, I believe, before that, but he just had this amazing capability to lock in that double bass, and that's something, I think that a lot of bands back in those days were kind of missing, that really precise double bass, and this dude had it. And of course, adding that to the already heavy guitars, and then Rob Halford's just screaming vocals, which I've always loved his voice. I like his solo stuff too, man. I'm a big Rob Halford fan. Maybe it's the haircut, I don't know. But anyway, so you combine all that together with that new element of this, more metal driven drums. It just sent the band in a completely different direction, in my opinion, and it was just like, wow, I was just so overwhelmed by that album. So yeah, Painkiller, that entire album, I can't even really highlight a song. I mean, I love the song Painkiller, but that entire album, let me just say, there's no skippers or fillers. All these bands back in the day, they would have one, maybe two hit songs, and then the rest of the album kind of sucks, It's like, okay, you just had to record more songs, so you put this on there, but not Painkiller. And I would say that probably about really most metal bands, most heavy metal bands, they didn't, and I'm kind of going off track here, but most heavy metal bands didn't really have fillers. It's like if you liked one song, you're probably gonna like most of the album. But Painkiller especially, I mean, that entire album was just amazing. I still listen to it today. I still consider it actually one of my top 10 metal albums of all time. And of course that list changes from time to time. We all change our favorite bands depending on our mood, but that's pretty much always on my top 10 list. So yeah, Judas Priest, Painkiller. Freaking awesome album. And once again, guys, the beer we are talking about today on Meadow and Beer is the 60-minute IPA from Dogfish Head. Again, it's a really good session IPA. You know, just if you don't want something that's over the top hoppy, you want something just more smooth and balanced. Very good beer for that purpose. So yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Please give this video a thumbs up and leave any comments. I love to chat with you guys, of course, about metal and beer. It's just two very cool topics that's combined together here on this show. So thank you once again. Also, make sure you are subscribed to this channel, please. And that way you get the notifications every time I release a video. Make sure your notifications are on, all that good stuff. Thank you once again. I'll see you on the next Metal and Beer video.